A quick reality check, people. Let's touch base, as they say. We've got a lot of stuff to cover and talk about. Forgive me, this article was originally two different ones and I've sort of just combined them both. This video is not sponsored by Elgato, or by a mobile game, or part of a small-scale solipsistic network of hobbyist gamers who have to toe the company line to get their pittance of coin at the end of the day. In real life, the Second World War, a half-decade conflict with origins starting up in the 1930s that involved two politically diverse and different sides fighting a mechanized hell war that led to the biggest mobilization of humanity on the home front and front line in history. While the Battlefield franchise is a dying, oddly controversial game where immortal digital action figures do. I was considering putting this one off because, well, it is hard to write and enjoy a game with now a limited lifespan and promise. But I've been considering doing something like this since I created the channel. DICE has done many stupid things with their design, especially of this game, but accusations towards the developers that such a feature was self-indulgent and time-wasting coming out right now by those still beating a dead horse are being bandied around. Quite frankly, this is a load of bollocks, and people crowing about the game's indignant end really need to just move on. From what I clearly remember in the days of Battlefield 1 subreddit, is that all kinds of players wanted to customize their Battlefield avatar with multiple suggestions from practical to silly uniforms, helmets and even facial hair of the First World War, constantly being brought up. Clearly this is something the community has been aching for years. And DICE delivered despite the difficulties of wrestling with Frostbite and bleeding experienced coders and other development staff for the grind of making Battlefield 1 and Battlefront 2 in what, 2 years? 3? They cannot be faulted for doing what they are being asked for, with a level of detail not seen before in the franchise. When this feature was announced, I honestly expected we'd only be able to pick races and whole outfits instead of the modular race, hair, face, torso, legs we have in the game system. Despite the sad fact they weren't able to follow through with the authentic gear desired, and it took a depressing long time for them to do it with the vehicles, it showed they at least cared enough to even try. In a distant past, they even gave players such a choice back in the early days of Battlefield Vietnam. Back in Battlefield Vietnam, each class had two distinct models based on the armies that fought in the asterisk battles the game chose for many of the maps. Granted, it was a simple swap between models on a different engine, the Rando L1. This is nothing new, not a waste of resources or really even just a big issue. I even recall that on the US side, some of the soldier models with each class were African American Rangers or Marines, or South Vietnamese soldiers. I don't even remember such pointless angry debates over racial representation unlike now with the present modern games. Compared to Battlefield 1942's customization, it was a huge advance from just having the opposing team's hat or helmet when you picked up their weapon gear. Battlefield 3 and 4 also had African American Marines. One was actually a main character in the over-the-top action movie Clancy wannabe single-player campaign of 4. With Battlefield 4, they provided some form of player customization with the camouflage patterns and colours given to the US Marines, PLA and Russian Special Forces factions. A majority of which were certainly not authentic or accurate, but nobody really oddly complained except for the fact they wanted to change more than just digital camouflage patterns. The weird arena-based free-to-play and now completely forgotten Battlefield Heroes had an even more in-depth system and kept it going and being played for years after its release of its digital store. Sad fact too, it was supported longer than Battlefield 5 in its present state. Aside from, well, Battlefield 1942, the games have always had the design intent not to be monochrome focused, and with care towards each of their central themes and backgrounds. I imagine if DICE had the technology and time, they'd inject a lot more detail into their first Second World War item, but the modding community stepped in and did it for them. Accusing them of pandering when they are simply moving with the times and delivering what asked for, at least to me, seems utterly pointless. As a grown adult, long-time Battlefield fan and armchair hobbyist historian, I find the shift from people wanting historical authenticity to downright whitewashing historical fact and claiming it fantasy simply troubling. Being a Caucasian white European, this does not have a direct association of pain and sadness, but nevertheless I find it quite frankly insulting to the real life subject matter. Battlefield may have been over the top dumb franchise for shits and giggles, but the Second World War really did happen, and women and people of colour found themselves fighting in the total war of the period alongside their more common white allies or behind the front line doing vital tasks that kept the war machine moving. To put it bluntly, it is shameful a minority of fans of this franchise are calling for digital segregation of race, while at the same time demanding historical accuracy, which ironically in this instance DICE has provided. This is quite frankly insane. Yes, obviously the number of fighting combatants in the conflict for some armies were homogenous white men. DICE actually listened to some of the feedback despite it being mockingly hateful and have kept the German race locked to Caucasian Europeans only. Yet sadly complaints persist despite ample historical evidence and fact that from hundreds of sources of over a half a century old that two of the primary powers of the Western Allies have people of colour fighting in both competent roles and technical positions throughout the whole conflict. Despite the real-life sacrifices and struggles of the Buffalo soldiers in the Pacific on the ground in their tanks, or the Tuskegee airmen who fought in the front line in the skies, prejudice and hate persist long after their deaths in the stupidest contexts possible. Japanese-American Nisei volunteered the US Army's 442nd Regiment and fought on the front line in combat missions in multiple campaigns in France and Italy. Earlier in the war, British, Nigerian and Indian soldiers fought and pushed the Italians out of occupied Ethiopia, working with the Ethiopian army. Many of these men of colour fighting in this global conflict were decorated for their bravery with the Army's highest honours. The SOE accepted women, some of which weren't even of British nationality or Caucasian descent, who spied and fought both covertly with resistant members of occupied countries and when the time for liberation of Europe came directly on the front line like any other soldier of the conflict. They suffered the same horrible torture and death faced by the male agent and resistance counterparts at the hands of the Gestapo and SS due to the commando order. The Soviet Union had thousands of female soldiers fighting on the front line in many different roles, both competent and support-wise. They even had an elite all-female air squadron called the Night Witches. It is a sad irony that one faction that would have doubled down on this design choice will not be included in Battlefield 5. The British Empire, despite dying a slow death throughout the 30s, still had the power and pull to request or influence many to help fight the Axis in exchange for guarantees for post-war independence or dominion status. Many answered the call. Men from the West Indies, West Africa and Nigeria fought and died in campaigns rarely talked about outside history books and documentaries. Chinese and Eurasian volunteers fought against the Japanese in the East directly or indirectly via resistance fighting, in the jungles of Burma, Gurkhas along with many other races from the Indian subcontinent, fighting for the last time in the Raj, bled and struggled. There are other groups and factions of forgotten soldiers too, many on both the Axis and Allies that fought and died. Very few will ever get their stories told outside books or the odd museum dedicated to their distant memory. These people were real. Their descendants might even play the same damn games as most of us. It seems only fair that they get a small degree of dignity and respect as well. A mini-campaign in the single player more or less has to hammer this concept into the player's head, but it seems some players are more obsessed with the janky First World War light machine gun. It's just downright and surreal in general this has to be constantly pointed out. Just as surreal as those thinking that a game of simulated over-the-top consequence-free violence is a legitimate tribute to their complicated experiences, it really honestly is not. The mainline source for our past is still vastly researched dedicated books assembled over time by professional accredited historians, not video games. A brief aside, if you want to respect the dead of this or any conflict, donate your money to an anti-war charity or museum dedicated to preserving the history and educating people. Stop trying to pretend you are sincere and respectful before indulging in recreating a digital fantasy of destruction and conflict. It comes off as hollow and childish. It goes from surreal to simply sad when said so-called fans turn us into a no-homers club situation due to their prejudices. I am aware of the hypocrisy of this all, by the way, but I accept this as a shallow-minded, hollow entertainment product. I am also still amazed DICE is at least trying to educate and mention these forgotten soldiers, even in the most rushed, contextless way possible. Now obviously not everyone in the Battlefield community is prejudiced, but it seems sadly the loudest and most toxic of people drown us all out. Those who just want to have a good time that really cannot be bothered to get involved in such a debate too. It reflects poorly back on the community as a whole though if nothing at all is said. There is so much information many of us don't study history or military history cannot know or comprehend. Much is lost in the passage of time and the fact those who fought and suffered moved on with their lives. Entertainment-focused media that uses the Second World War cannot be bothered now to really explore the diverse and lengthy conflict, focusing instead on the safer, well-trodden and known battles or operations to ensure a definite profit. When the Second World War game got peaked in the mid-noughties and the backlash and loss of interest followed, it was not over the fact there were too many games set in this conflict. It was the fact that these games kept doing the same old song and dance. The Normandy campaign, the Battle of the Bulge, and Stalingrad. People just got, quite frankly, bored. I can count the games from this era that diverged from this pattern on the fingers of my hands. I and others too are simply gutted that we will not see the usual settings, but also the promised and neglected campaigns and battles of the war. The forgotten soldiers will never get their stories properly told, and the context of their presence will never truly be explained. Battlefield 1942's strongest mods ironically were ones that put more focus, detail and polish on the Second World War conflict and ironed out or toned out the issues of the original game. They did this without barely any drama, and despite their crude technology and lack of strange unlocked fever, they were damn fun to play. Ironically, the games that the history-focused realism fans of the community gravitate to, like Hell Let Loose and Postscriptum, have quite a few developers who were big fans or cut their teeth in the Battlefield 2/1942 modding eras. Such games are more appealing due to their hyper-focus on actual campaigns and battles rather than the traditional abstract vagueness of Battlefield game map and settings. The lack of customization and representation has to do with the fact that, as indie studios, such luxuries are left for post-release content or when they shift their focus to the parts of the conflict where it would be relevant. The game franchise died and lost a part of its identity the day they decided that Frostbite was not allowed to be modded in any way or form. The corpus peaked a little too when they decided it was easy to copy modern gaming trends, trying to appeal to every type of gamer and also attempt to break into the competitive gaming scene. The many diverse types of people who flocked to this franchise in the past with the older games found a mod that reflected their interests doing things that the main game developers had not the time, budget or focus to achieve. In an alternate reality where EA wasn't so protected of their novelty house fall down engine, this could have been the solution to many issues that plague us now in the present. But this is a vapid speculation, so let's just get back on topic now. I want to applaud DICE for attempting something different myself. I want them to at least at the start of their return in the Second World War to focus on the Battle of France, the Norway campaign, North and East Africa and early Greece and Italy. In an alternate reality where the game came out a year later, perhaps this is what would be actually occurring. History without context can be confusing and alien noise to some. They should have brought the codex back and hired a company to produce slick videos exploring the history and fact behind their design choices, rather than assuming some will read books and educate themselves. Many just wish to play a game, and without the codex system from Battlefield 1 to motivate or pique interest, people will remain clueless. In a cruel way, this weird controversy still divides and causes issues. The ghosts of the Nazis haunting us even in the world of mind-numbing light entertainment. God damn, this is a long video. Like I said, this is a one-man podcast, really. This is also a combination of several half-written articles mashed together to talk about. They had a lot more focus, so I do apologise if your eyes are glazing over at this point. But the joy of this channel was bundled with the joy and speculation of playing and seeing what this game would bring. But I had to do this one. I know only 20 people will ever actually listen to this rambling video. This is fine, it's all a passion project for me to pass the time. I want to ensure and get the message across, however, to any future developers out there who will try emulating this franchise, that at least the intent to tell people that the Second World War wasn't for exclusively white dudes constantly in Normandy is not a bad thing. To those future developers, just be a bit more focused to your setting. Provide context to your game's history. Don't be steered away by vocal loud noises from a crude, ignorant minority. Don't let greedy PR people and marketeers distract you or lead you away from your goals. This video may rub some people the wrong way, but our recently comfortable world was built by the suffering by people in these historical events. It would just seem tragic to let them get away and not call them out for stirring up such bollocks. The dead cannot even defend themselves. Nobody ever dug deep enough about this so-called controversy after the game came out. People moved on or just got mad at something else in the end. Despite this massive fan base and modern world of games journalism, nobody took the time to come out of the woodwork and take the side of DICE, and in general actually explain the context of the history. I cannot blame many people because the escalation of the whole matter became petty and childish and people just wanted to talk or speculate what the game was going to be. The next video will be about tone and the design of the game when I get around to doing it. Thank you for listening and goodbye.